Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today I'm going to be ranking every single NHL team from 32 down to number 1 for the 2022 NHL season. Now the 2022 season is currently underway and we're a few days into it, but I thought I'd rank every single NHL team from 32 down to number 1, the worst to the best for this upcoming season, who I see being the most successful teams this season in the regular season and the playoffs, and seeing who I think will be the worst, the best, and everything in between. So when it comes to my picks and my top 32 in the NHL, where do I have your favorite NHL team? Where do they place in my rankings? And who do I see as the best and the worst in the NHL this season? Watch till the end for the complete rankings and every single pick. And make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 60% of the people that are watching are not subscribed. If you like hockey, this channel is the place to be. Now, when it comes to my rankings for today's power rankings, the way I'm basically looking at it is how are these teams looking coming into this year, how they played so far in the regular season, and what are my expectations for them throughout the year and the NHL playoffs as well. Now, if you guys want to see the power rankings become a pretty much monthly series, maybe every other month, make sure you hit that like button. Definitely helps the channel a ton and helps this video as well a lot too if you want to see more like this. But we're going to start out at number 32 and make our way all the way down to number 1. And I'm going to say this right now, there should be no surprises at this 32 spot, and no, it is not the Buffalo Sabres because they've looked actually okay so far, but at number 32, I'm going to go with the Louis Eriksson Arizona Coyotes. The worst team in the league right now, I think, is looking like it. I mean, their roster was bottom 2 at best heading into this year, and they have definitely felt the pain so far, losing against Buffalo, losing against Columbus in just a horrible fashion. Arizona isn't for a long year, but if they get Shane Wright, it'll obviously be all worth it. But now we're going to head on to number 31, and this is a team that I don't think is going to be as bad as Arizona, even though I predicted them to be the worst team in the league a couple of weeks back, but I still think they'll struggle quite a bit throughout this year, even in that terrible Pacific Division. I'm going to move on at number 31 to the Anaheim Ducks. Now, I said terrible Pacific Division. The Anaheim Ducks being as bad as they are is a big reason why that Pacific is so bad, and I think Anaheim will have some major pains throughout this year. Even though Zegras and Drysdale and some of those young guys will take some big steps forward, I think it's going to be like 2 steps back for a lot of veterans there, and I don't think Anaheim's going to be nearly close enough to be a playoff team or even be close to competing this season. But now with Arizona at 32 and Anaheim at number 31, we can now move on to the best team in the NHL at number 30 in the Buffalo Sabres, who started off with a 2-0-0 record. Absolute mad lads. You love to see it. And even though I don't see it really lasting for the Buffalo Sabres, I do still see them being better than people expected. I know so many people that are predicting for like 45 points, 50 points. I don't see them being that bad. And I actually see Don Granato having some good moments as a coach there. You're going to see some of the younger players improve quite a bit. Guys like Middlestat and Dylan Cousins, and I think the Sabres will be better than last year potentially and could have some major improvement from the youth, which, let's be honest, is pretty much the only thing Buffalo should be looking for this next year. Now we're going to move on to number 29. This is a team that I kind of go back and forth on how bad I see them being. So far, they've looked pretty meh and under average, and I think that's pretty much the best way to describe this team. At number 29, I'm going to go with the Nashville Predators. Now, I think the Nashville Predators can still be a decent team, and they might rise up the rankings perhaps throughout the year, but for Nashville, for me, they just look lackluster, and I kind of see them being in that direction. I still think Juuse Saros, Tolvanen, and Tomasino, you're going to see some big youth improvement, but at the same time, the core is just not good enough, and that center situation is still absolutely dreadful. But now moving on to number 28, another team like Nashville that's below average, but will have some good improvement when it comes to the youth and should be a transitioning team. We're going to move on at number 28 to the San Jose Sharks. Now you're going to see some big improvement from guys like William Eklund, hopefully coming out of the team full time, and some of that youth as well looking better and better. I still think San Jose Sharks should rebuild and go into that full youth direction, but at the same time, I still think they could be a decent competitive team, even if they might not make the NHL playoffs. Next up, though, at number 27, I'm going to move on to a team here that I still think could be decent this year, but the division they're in is really the biggest thing keeping them back. At number 27, I'm going to go to the Columbus Blue Jackets. It really sucks that they're in the Metro because I still don't think they stand a chance, even though they have started the season off pretty well, but I do think Columbus could play spoiler quite well with guys like Jacob Voracek coming out of the team and Patrick Laine hopefully putting in a full-time role and getting used to the Columbus system. I still think there's a lot to look forward to with Columbus this next year, and you'll see guys like Sillinger from this last draft having full-time roles, which is great to see 1 year out of his draft year. Hopefully, they do not mess him up, though. Now we're going to go on to number 26, and I'm going to go on to a team that's had some topsy-turvy play so far, but has been very fun to watch in the Detroit Red Wings. Now, I think that will stay the same. I think Detroit's going to be a very fun team to watch this year. already Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond are looking fantastic for Detroit, and I feel like with the Red Wings, you're going to see a lot of improvement there with Nedeljkovic playing, with guys on top of that being healthy like Bertuzzi this next year. Detroit can still have a lot to look forward to, even if they might not be a playoff team quite yet. But now going on to number 25, we have to unfortunately move on to the definition of mediocrity, continuing to keep their horrible GM that keeps the team in an absolute standstill. At number 25, I gotta go on to the Calgary Flames. Now, unless Jacob Markstrom pulls out a Vezina Trophy season out of his hat, I don't see Calgary doing much of anything this next year in a terrible Pacific Division, which is almost the worst part. I see some players in Calgary doing quite well. I see Johnny Gaudreau having a great season in his contract year, but besides that, I see it being another season for the Calgary Flames, unfortunately. Now we're gonna move on to number 24, and this is a team that's kind of the opposite of Calgary, a team that has a lot of great future coming up, and even though they might not make the playoffs, I think could have some great spoiler wins down the road, especially like they did in the second half of last season. At number 24, I'm going to go on to the Ottawa Senators. You're going to see Shane Pinto and that youth fully come into full and see Shane Pinto, I think, in the Calder candidacy. I mean, so far the goaltending in Forsberg has been pretty fantastic. The defense is going to be something to watch out for. It's not going to be great, but hopefully we'll see some improvements there with Eric Brandstrom coming into the fold. But overall, Ottawa's going to have another transition year, another development year, but it'll look even better for the future with Brady Tkachuk being fully signed. But now we're going to move on to number 23, and we're going to go to a super underrated team for this next year, a team that I think could have some really great potential. At number 23, I'm going to go with the LA Kings. Now, to me, the LA Kings are going to be a super fascinating team to watch, especially in that pretty bad Pacific Division. Hopefully, we'll see Kyle Peterson come into the fold as a full-time starter. We're going to see the youth wave as well come into effect with Turcotte and Byfield and Kaliev and Kochev and a lot of different development guys there. We're also going to see the defense maybe take a step above what they were last year, even though they were solid. We could see it maybe become even better with them in the future. LA still has one of the best futures and prospect pools in the entire NHL, and this year is the year that I think they start to finally strut their skills and showcase that firepower. Now we're going to go on to number 22, and this is another team that in that Pacific Division has a chance to make the playoffs. I'm just not convinced they'll be good enough to get there. At number 22, I have the Seattle Kraken. Now, they've been pretty interesting so far. The depth and Brandon Tanev has been elite so far for Seattle. But besides that, I think they've been pretty much an average team up to this point. The defense has been fine. The goaltending's been fine. Nothing that absolutely stands out, though. Unless the Seattle Kraken go on an absolute run, definitely not looking as good as Vegas in their initial year. But once I say that, Seattle's going to go on like a 10-game win streak. So just keep that in mind. Now we're going to move on to number 21, though. And another team that I see is extremely underrated, just like the LA Kings. The only thing I think keeping them back from the playoffs really is their own division in the Metro. At number 21, I have the New Jersey Devils. So far, they look pretty good, and I think that will continue throughout the season. I mean, New Jersey is a super underrated team. Might not be a playoff team, but I could see getting around 85, 88 points, being a solid team with Dougie Hamilton added on to that defense, the goaltending hopefully being improved, and the forward group getting some even bigger improvement from Jack Hughes and a bunch of the other young studs there. But now we can get inside the 20th spot, and I gotta say, having New Jersey next to this team could prove to be a little bit of a bad take, but we'll see how this team does throughout the next couple of weeks, especially. At number 20, I have the New York Rangers. Now, at the beginning of the season, did not predict the Rangers to make the playoffs, but so far, even though they did get a big win versus Montreal, which isn't saying much since they're 0-3, I feel like the Rangers have been pretty disappointing so far. Maybe it's just because I'm still disappointed about the Kravtsov situation, but at the same time, the Rangers have looked kind of lackluster. Igor Shesterkin has looked fantastic. He's been the biggest MVP besides Adam Fox this season so far, but the Rangers need more than that. They need the whole forward group to contribute. They need that whole defense to come together and Jacob Trouba to be much, much better than he's been so far. Now we're going to go on to number 19, and this is another team that's been extremely disappointing so far this year, and we're going to go on to the team that the Rangers just beat in the Montreal Canadiens. I really don't know what to make of the Canadiens right now. They have been extremely disappointing, and I didn't even think they would make the playoffs this next year. I thought they'd be pretty close and pretty competitive right to the very end. But to be this bad is almost crazy to me. And I think it kind of starts from the top end, guys like Nick Suzuki, Tyler Toffoli, even Cole Caufield have been as good as they should be. There's just been a lot of chaos when it comes to the power play just being horrible so far. The goaltending just not being what it needed to be either, and just being completely disappointing overall. We'll see if the Habs can get out of this slump, but it's not looking good whatsoever for them. But now going on to another Canadian team at number 18, a team that I think will make the NHL playoffs this time around, though. I'm going to go with the Pacific Division team in the Vancouver Canucks. Now, I think the Canucks saw some big improvement over last year. It honestly could not go more wrong than what we saw last year, truly. With the injuries and all the COVID situation stuff, it was just a horrible time. But now with the additions of Connor Garland and hopefully OEL and Myers having rebound years and Thatcher Demko hopefully coming to his own as a full-time NHL goaltender, I think the Canucks will have a lot to look forward to, and also having Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes signed is a pretty big bonus on top of that. Now we're going to move on to number 17, though. This is another team that I think could be outside of the playoffs, but has looked better than what I expected so far in the Washington Capitals. Now, I will say this, the goaltending and defense has looked more strong and more complete than I originally predicted, and if that can hold, then I think the Capitals will be a playoff team. That was really my big concern. The forward group has been stellar so far. That's not really too much of a surprise, but if that defense and goaltending, especially the goaltending and Zibanejad and Samsonov, can continue to play the way they have, the Capitals have a real shot at the playoffs and should be a playoff team. But now we're going to move on inside the top 16, and this was a team that I thought originally would make the playoffs. Now I'm not too sure, but coming in at number 16, I'm going to go with the Chicago Blackhawks. Now the Blackhawks really come down to one thing in my opinion so far this year, and that is defense. They're 0-2-1 to start out, and the defense I think has been a huge reason because of that. Seth Jones has not been good enough. Other guys like Connor Murphy have not been up to the levels they were in seasons past, and that desperately needs to change. Maybe it's Jeremy Colleton as the head coach. Maybe he's the problem potentially, but Chicago needs better defense and consistency, especially if they want Marc-Andre Fleury to be the guy throughout this season. The offense has been fine, but the defense needs to step up for the Blackhawks. Now going into number 15 and inside the top 15 officially, I'm going to go on ahead to my favorite NHL team, and this team could also fluctuate a lot throughout this year, but at the 15th spot, I'm going to go with the Dallas Stars. Now, didn't look too great in that game versus the Boston Bruins, but the Boston Bruins, I think, are going to be one of the best teams in the league this next year, so I'm not too worried yet, but Braden Holtby was fantastic against the Rangers, which I think is huge. That goaltending situation needs to be clear and consistent. The defense is solid, but the offense is really what it all comes down to. Are the top guys going to be able to show up for this next year, especially in the power play? That'll be huge to see. I think Dallas needs some major improvement, though, after last season's disaster of a situation, and they do need to make the playoffs, or else this core could be blown up after this year. But we got a little bit of a trend of Central Division teams, and we're going to keep that going on to number 14, baby, and move on to the St. Louis Blues. Now, the St. Louis Blues, I think, have real strong potential this next season as a playoff team. With the additions of Buchnevich and Sod on that forward group, already adding on to a strong blueprint there, we're going to see that massively improve. We're going to see hopefully Torrey Krug take that next step after a so-so season for him last year. We're going to see also Jordan Binnington potentially have a big season, and one of his best in the regular seasons, hopefully. I think they'll be needed for St. Louis, but they're still a strong team, and I think will be a playoff team in that Central Division, especially with how good they are against rival opponents, and already playing pretty well against the Colorado Avalanche too. Next up, though, at number 13, we're going to move on to a team that's can't get past the first round, unfortunately, and I am putting in playoff predictions sort of into these power rankings too, so at number 13, I'm just going to go out and say the Toronto Maple Leafs are at this spot. Now, I still think they'll be a very good team, but again, I'm factoring in playoffs, so you can kind of get why they wouldn't be top 10 in my rankings. Still a solid team, though, and they'll be a ton of fun to watch come regular season and playoff time too. Next up at number 12, well, fun to watch for non-Leafs fans. I gotta make that clear. At number 12, we're gonna move on to a team that I still think could be pretty decent this year. Hasn't been up to my expectations so far, especially the defensive goaltending, but there is still time to improve in the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, I did say the Flyers would win the division, but again, I'm also factoring in playoff success, where I don't see them having much of it, but I do still see them having a strong regular season, with hopefully that defense being improved and Carter Hart potentially taking that next step. Hasn't really happened so far yet, but Carter Hart needs to step up for the Flyers to be truly successful. Next up, at number 11, we're going to go to another team that is strong to start out at 2-0-0, and I'm going to move on to the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, I still have some doubts when it comes to the goaltending, but the defense so far has been extremely strong for them, which is not really too surprising, and the forward group has come up clutch a lot of times here and there, and I think that'll be the case throughout this regular season. I think the Canes will have some good playoff success this year, hopefully, and maybe that goaltending is able to stay strong. I mean, I still have my reservations about Anderson and Ronta, but if they're able to stay healthy, the Canes will be once again a strong team, and could be definitely inside the top 10 by the time the power ranking series is over this next year. Now, coming into the 10th spot, and now starting us off in the top 10, this is the elites of the elite. At number 10, I'm going to move on to a team that I have some pretty big hopes for once their big guys come back, in the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, I think Pittsburgh's still going to be a strong team this year, even though Malkin's going to be out for the next couple weeks, but it seems that Crosby is pretty close coming back, and the Penguins have been pretty amazing without both of those guys. Considering their situation, the forward group has been been really opportunistic. The defense has been solid, and the goaltending has been pretty improved throughout this year so far. Even if it hasn't been perfect, the Penguins are finding ways to get it done without Crosby and Malkin, which I think is huge once they get those guys back. But now at number 9, we're going to move on to another team that I find vastly underrated and does not get enough credit. Even though I don't see them having major improvement over last year, I don't think they really need to because they were so solid in last season's play. I'm going to move on to number 9 and move on to the Minnesota Wild. Now, Kirill Kaprizov's obviously going to do his thing, but guys like Joel Eriksson Ek, we're going to see Nico Sturm. A lot of that forward group, I think, will take that next step of Kevin Fiala becoming the star that he was when he first arrived in Minnesota. That defense, though, is among the best in the league. That goaltending can as well be fantastic with how good Cam Talbot was last season. I think Minnesota is a great built team and could have some pretty big success, hopefully, in the upcoming NHL playoffs. But now moving on to number 8, we're going to go to a team that's extremely top heavy, but they're so top heavy that it's pretty much impossible for them to miss the playoffs this next year, especially in that terrible Pacific Division. I'm going to move on to the Edmonton Oilers. Now, we all know the Oilers can do and can be, but to me, it all comes down to that defense, whether they will be fantastic or horrible. That is the big question. Will Duncan Keith get back to form? Will Cody Ceci continue his decent play from the Pittsburgh Penguins? Those are really the big questions for me personally. I think the goaltending could still hold. Mike Smith has been decent so far, and we all know what that forward group can do, but that defense is definitely the most important part, even in the regular season, but especially come playoff time, where it's going to be needed the most. Now we're going to go on to the team that dropped them off in the playoffs in the last year's NHL playoffs. At number 7, I'm going to move on to another Canadian team here and move on to, my opinion, the best Canadian team in the Winnipeg Jets. Now, I know they haven't been great so far. I get that, but I'm not really too worried about the Jets long term because of the group they have going on here. I think it's just a matter of time before that forward group really explodes when we see guys like Pierre-Luc Dubois, Ehlers, Wheeler, Shively, the whole group there get together once again. I think the defense should be improved throughout the year with Schmidt and Dillon coming into play, and Connor Hellebuck should be in the talks for the Vezina Trophy, though he hasn't been too great so far. If that continues, that pretty much is game over for Winnipeg. But now coming in at number 6, we're going to move on to a team that I see winning the Pacific Division, and let's be honest, 9 times out of 10 they should win this division. We'll see if they actually get it done, though, in the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, Max Pacioretty and Mark Stone are going to be out for the next little bit, which will suck for them, especially, just saying, if you got Jack Eichel, maybe it wouldn't have been a problem, Vegas, just saying, but I think Vegas should still be good this next year. That defense is spectacular. We'll see if Robin Lehner is able to come into his own as the full starter in net for Vegas, but that forward group and that defense is still good enough to get them there, in my opinion, even though the injury luck might come up to crumble them throughout the year. Now we're going to move on to number 5, though, and go on to the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions in the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they started off pretty rough, but have looked better and better as the games have gone by, and I think that could be the case with Tampa this next year. They have a lot of new faces on that bottom 6 especially, and that might take some getting used to for Tampa to fully use those guys and utilize them perfectly, which I think will also perfect itself by the second half. Vasilevsky's still the best goaltender in the league. That defense is still fantastic, and the top end on that forward group is good enough to where the bottom 6 doesn't need to contribute too much for Tampa's success. Even at that third line from last year not being there is going to be pretty rough come playoff time. Now we're going to go on to number 4 and go on to a team that I have pretty big hopes for this next season. Even though I don't see them making the Cup final or winning the Stanley Cup, I still see the New York Islanders being a great team. Now they are 0-2 to start out, which is a little bit worrying, but I think the Islanders should be good enough to get there at least. The goaltending is still among the best in the league. That tandem is fantastic. That defense should be top 5, top 3, and that forward group with Anders Lee coming in fully healthy should get a pretty big boost. We'll see what the Islanders are able to do, but let's hope that 0-2 start isn't indicative of the rest of the season for them. But now we are inside the top 3, and I'm just going to go out and say it. At number 3, I have the Boston Bruins. Now, I know the Boston Bruins being this high for a lot of people is pretty rich, but I do see the Boston Bruins having a great season in the regular season and the playoffs as well. I think a lot of that is because of their offseason acquisitions. I think the goaltending is among one of the best goalie tandems in the NHL with Ullmark and Swayman there. I think the defense is extremely underrated, and Charlie McAvoy is a top 3 defenseman in the league, in my opinion, and that forward group is exactly as advertised. Even though they might have some losses and some growing pains without David Krejci, that top line is among the best in the league, and we'll see Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno and all these different assets having full seasons in Boston, which I think is key. I think they'll be fantastic, and once the playoffs come around, guys like Patrice Bergeron on the final year of their deals will be as motivated as ever to finally get back to the Cup final and finally win it once again. Now we're going to go on to the top 2, and if you guys have seen the standings predictions over the the past few weeks, this might not be too surprising in the top 2, but at the second place spot, I have the Florida Panthers. I am one of the biggest Panthers believers out there. At least I have to be, because having them in the top 2 and having them in the Stanley Cup final, I think is pretty high praise, but I think the Panthers definitely deserve it. I mean, we've seen Sergei Bobrovsky being fantastic already, and man, if Bobrovsky can get back to Bobrovsky level, the Panthers are going to be absolutely insane. I mean, if Bobrovsky gets back to Bobrovsky level, you're going to have Spencer Knight as a backup, you're going to have that fantastic defense with Ekblad fully healthy, you're going to have that forward group, which is, in my opinion, the most underrated in the entire NHL with the depth and the star power they have. Florida's going to be awesome, and they're going to be so fun to watch this next year. Now, speaking of fun to watch, at number 1, we got to go to the team that I think will win the President's Trophy, and it'd just be a shame if they can't get past the second round or even the third round this next year in the Colorado Avalanche. Now, I see it being the Avalanche and the Panthers in the Stanley Cup final, and I do see the Avalanche winning it if it came to that, which should happen, but the Avalanche still have had some growing pains so far with Nathan MacKinnon being out. We'll see how the Avalanche are able to respond once he comes back in, but the Avalanche should be just fine. Their forward group is still fantastic, their defense is still fantastic, and we'll see how Darcy Kemper goes into that full pressure role that he didn't quite have with the Arizona Coyotes. I think the Avs should be just fine, though, and we'll see if they can actually get something done in the playoffs this time around, which, let's be honest, if it's not this year, who knows when it'll ever happen. It has to happen this year, and the Avs have to get it done. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Make sure you comment down below, what do you guys agree and disagree with my rankings for this next season? Where would you place your favorite NHL team? Where do you see them being? And let me know who you guys think are the worst and the best teams in the NHL. Make sure you share this video with your friends, get it out there, and click on this card for all my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. Now, I'm suffering from some extreme allergies right now, so sorry if words don't quite make sense in today's video sometimes, so I appreciate you guys still sticking right to the very end. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, enjoy your day, have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.